A true empath feels before they think. There is a kind of intelligence the world rarely measures. It doesn't show up on tests. It doesn't announce itself in conversations. And it is often misunderstood as weakness. That intelligence is empathy. A true empath does not experience life the way most people do. Before a thought forms, before logic steps in, before words are spoken, they feel the shift in a room when someone walks in carrying unspoken grief. They feel the tension behind a polite smile. They feel the emotional weight in silence, long before anyone admits something is wrong. This is not imagination. This is not oversensitivity. This is a nervous system trained by life to read emotional truth faster than language. A true empath feels before they think. And that single trait shapes their entire existence. From an early age, many empaths learned that emotions were not always spoken, but they were always present. They learned to read tone instead of words, energy instead of explanations, atmosphere instead of facts. Often, this ability was not developed in comfort, but in necessity. When emotional safety is uncertain, awareness becomes survival, and so the empath adapts, becoming highly attuned, deeply perceptive, and quietly observant. They don't ask, "What did you say?" They ask, "What did you mean?" Because they can feel the difference. This is why empaths are often the first to notice when something is wrong and the last to be believed. Their insight arrives before proof. Their knowing comes before evidence. And in a world that values logic over intuition, this kind of awareness is often dismissed. But feeling before thinking is not irrational. It is emotional intelligence at its purest form. A true empath's body responds to emotion automatically. Their chest tightens when someone lies. Their energy drops when a room becomes heavy. Their mood shifts when someone nearby is in pain. They don't choose this response. It happens, and because it happens so naturally, empaths often assume everyone experiences life this way. They don't realize that what feels normal to them is actually rare. This is where the burden begins. Because when you feel before you think, you also feel more than you should. You absorb emotions that don't belong to you. You carry conversations long after they end. You replay moments, tones, pauses, wondering what you missed or what you could have done differently. While others move on, the empath processes. And while others protect themselves through detachment, the empath connects instinctively. This makes them extraordinary listeners, safe spaces, emotional anchors for others, but it also makes them vulnerable. A true empath doesn't walk into relationships casually. They sense emotional depth early, and they attach with sincerity. They give presence, patience, and understanding, often without realizing how much it costs them. They are the ones who stay when it's uncomfortable, who listen when they are tired, who forgive before they are healed, not because they are weak, but because feeling deeply makes ignoring pain impossible. Yet this same strength becomes their greatest challenge, because feeling before thinking means boundaries often come later. The empath explains instead of withdraws. They justify instead of distance. They stay longer than they should, hoping awareness will create change. But there comes a moment, quiet, internal, irreversible, when feeling transforms into clarity. A moment when the empath finally thinks after feeling. And in that moment, something shifts. They realize that understanding someone does not require sacrificing themselves. That empathy without limits becomes self-abandonment. That feeling everything does not mean caring everything. When a true empath reaches this realization, their energy changes. They become quieter, not colder, more selective, not distant, more grounded, not disconnected. Their silence is not confusion, it is integration. They still feel deeply, but now they choose where that feeling goes. This is the evolution of the empath, from absorption to awareness, from overgiving to discernment, from emotional reaction to emotional mastery. A true empath never loses their sensitivity. They simply stop offering it to places where it is not respected. And this is the final truth. Feeling before thinking is not a flaw. It is a gift that requires wisdom to carry. And guided by self-respect, empathy becomes strength. When paired with boundaries, it becomes leadership. And when honored, it becomes a quiet power that changes lives, starting with the empath zone. Because a true empath doesn't stop feeling. They just learn when to let feeling lead and when to let self-worth take over. They give deeply. Even when it costs them, there are people in this world who give without calculating the cost. They don't measure effort. They don't keep score. They don't ask what they will receive in return. These people are empaths. A true empath gives deeply, even when it costs them time, energy, rest, and sometimes pieces of themselves. Not because they are trying to be selfless heroes, but because withholding care feels unnatural to them. When an empath sees pain, something inside them responds immediately. They don't pause to decide if it's convenient. They don't wait to see if it's deserved. They feel it and they move toward it. They listen when others are uncomfortable with silence. They stay present when conversations become heavy. They offer understanding when judgment would be easier. This depth of giving is not learned from abundance. It is often shaped by absence. Many empaths grew up learning that love was something you proved through patience, emotional awareness, and self-sacrifice. They learned to become the stable one, the understanding one, the emotional translator in the room. Over time, giving became their language of connection. But here is what the world rarely acknowledges: giving deeply has a price. Empaths feel exhaustion that sleep alone cannot fix. They carry emotional residue from conversations long after they end. They absorb stress, anxiety, and sadness that were never meant to be theirs, and still they give. They show up even when they are drained. They check in even when no one checks on them. They hold space even when they themselves feel unseen, not because they don't need care, but because they instinctively place others first. This is where misunderstanding begins. From the outside, empaths look strong, reliable, emotionally available. But inside, many are quietly depleted. Because when you give deeply without protection, you teach people that your energy is unlimited. And some will take without ever learning how to give back. Yet a true empath does not give to be repaid. They give because connection matters, because presence heals, because love to them is an action, not a concept. But there comes a moment when even the deepest givers pause, a moment when the empath realizes that compassion without boundaries becomes self-erasure, that generosity without reciprocity leads to burnout, that love should not require constant self-sacrifice. This realization doesn't make them bitter. It makes them awake. They begin to give with intention instead of impulse, to choose where their energy goes, to recognize that protecting themselves does not make them less caring. It makes their care sustainable. And this is the quiet power of a true empath. They don't stop giving. They stop overgiving. They learn that their depth is precious, that their presence is valuable, that their energy deserves respect, including from themselves. Because a true empath's greatest lesson is this: you can give deeply without giving yourself away. And when an empath learns this, their generosity no longer costs them their peace. It becomes the very thing that preserves it. Their silence means emotional finality. When a true empath becomes silent, it is not sudden. It is not impulsive, and it is never cruel. Their silence is the final chapter of a story that has already been read too many times. Before the silence, there were words. There were explanations. There were attempts to be understood. The empath tried to communicate feelings gently, clearly, repeatedly, hoping awareness would create change. They spoke when it was uncomfortable. They explained when it was exhausting. They stayed when leaving would have been easier. But each time their words were ignored, minimized, or misunderstood, Something inside them slowly closed. Empaths don't go silent because they stop caring. They go silent because they have cared without safety, reciprocity, or respect for too long. Silence is not their first language. It is their last. A true empath silence means that the emotional labor has ended. The over-explaining has stopped. The waiting for empathy has expired. What remains is clarity. This kind of silence is often misunderstood as coldness or indifference, but in reality it is emotional finality. By the time an empath is quiet, they have already grieved the relationship internally. They have already processed the disappointment. They have already accepted that being understood is no longer possible in that space. Their heart has done the heavy work before their absence becomes visible. This is why their silence feels different. There is no anger in it, no manipulation, no need to be heard, because silence for an empath is not punishment, it is protection. They stop responding not to hurt you, but to save themselves. They stop explaining not because they lack words, but because words have lost their power. The empath realizes something painful and liberating at the same time, that staying emotionally available in an emotionally unsafe environment is a form of self-betrayal. So they withdraw gently, quietly, without drama, and that quiet withdrawal is permanent. Once a true empath reaches emotional finality, they do not return to the same version of connection, even if they still feel love, even if they still wish well. Because love without mutual care becomes a wound, not a bond. This is why people are often shocked by an empath's detachment. They mistake silence for something temporary. They think it can be reversed with apologies or promises. But they don't realize the truth. The relationship ended low, and before the silence appeared. Silence is simply the moment the empath stops bleeding out loud. And in that silence, the empath finally chooses themselves, not with anger, not with blame, but with peace. Their silence means the lesson has been learned. The boundary has been drawn. The emotional door has closed, not in hatred, but in clarity. Because when an empath goes silent, it is not an act of disappearance. It is an act of emotional survival. And once that silence arrives, the connection as it once existed is already gone. They detach without hatred. Only clarity. There is a moment in emotional growth that few people understand. It is the moment someone leaves without anger, without revenge, without the need to explain themselves one last time. This is not indifference. This is clarity. A true empath does not detach in rage. They detach after understanding everything. They have already seen the patterns. They have already traced the cycles. They have already tried empathy, patience, forgiveness, and communication. Detachment comes after comprehension, not before it. By the time an empath steps back, there is no hatred left to fuel the separation. Hatred requires energy, and the empath has already spent theirs trying to keep the connection alive. What remains is awareness. They understand what happened. They understand what was missing. And most importantly, they understand what continuing would cost them. This is why their detachment feels so calm. There is no dramatic exit, no emotional confrontation, no attempt to prove a point, because clarity does not argue. A true empath detaches when they finally accept a painful truth that love alone cannot fix a relationship where respect, accountability, or emotional safety is absent. They stop confusing empathy with obligation. They stop mistaking endurance for loyalty. They stop sacrificing their inner peace to keep something external intact. And this shift changes everything. The empath no longer needs closure conversation. They no longer wait for apologies that may never come. They no longer seek validation from the very place that depleted them, not because they don't care, but because they care correctly now. Detaching without hatred is a sign of emotional maturity. It means the empath has process their pain. Instead of projecting it, it means they have chosen understanding over resentment. They can acknowledge the good without denying the harm. They can remember the love without reopening the wound. This is clarity. Clarity says, I see you clearly now. I see myself clearly now. And I will not abandon myself again. A true empath does not erase people from their heart. They simply remove them from positions they no longer qualify for. This kind of detachment often confuses others because it does not look like suffering. It does not look like revenge. It looks like peace. And peace is unsettling to those who expected guilt, anger, or collapse. But peace is earned. It is earned through emotional labor, through self-reflection, through choosing growth over attachment. When an empath detaches with clarity, they carry no bitterness forward. They do not poison future connections with old wounds. They do not harden their heart. They remain soft but selective, open but grounded, loving but self-respecting. And this is the final truth. Detaching without hatred is not weakness. It is the strongest form of self-loyalty. Because when a true empath walks away with clarity, they are not losing love. They are protecting their capacity to love well again.